South Africa's ruling party, the African National Congress, as we all know, is more than a century old. It was formed at the start of the century to fight against colonialism and also to try to get the people of South Africa emancipated. Now, we know they've been ruling for the past 2 decades. And the question is, have they been able to transform themselves from a struggle party into a ruling party that understands the modern economy? Sean Hagedorn is an independent strategist. He joins me from Cape Town for our conversation today. Sean, I am not too sure I agree with you about the Kodak moment and the ANC, but I want you to explain yourself first.
Right. Okay. So I'm using as an analogy, a metaphor, the Kodak moment and how Kodak was an extremely profitable, very large company with huge market share in providing film. And then the market moved away from them. They needed to transition very radically, very quickly, and they failed to do so. And it cost them dearly. And now the marketplace is changing very quickly, and the ANC also needs to adapt.
So you are saying the ANC is very much in the mold of Kodak, and they've been able to make the transition from a party that fought for freedom to a party that is governing a modern economy that's built around knowledge and all those other things that we talk about today.
Right. And so the transition from an industrial to a knowledge-based economy is a huge piece. There's also the need to transform socially. And the ANC has emphasized that primarily, and it's not hard to understand why they would do that politically. And then the other element, which I think the private and the public sector have long underrated the challenge, is to transform from an economy which has been isolated and focused more on competency than competitiveness to be integrated within the world economy, and to do that the focus needs to be on competitiveness. And the politics in South Africa have very much gotten in the way.
Let's speak first about the first element of what you've just raised, the issue around socialism and the belief that you can have a government that drives the economy of a country. Are they too far off when you look at the model that China is pursuing? Because you have very much a monolithic party that is driving the economic agenda. And on the other hand, you have an economy that has been responding and has been growing extremely well. Is that a bad model to try to copy? Cyril Ramaphosa was there a few weeks ago.
It's very tempting. China has been extraordinarily successful over the last 35 years, but prior to that, they had a period of about 30 years, from 1949 to 1979, where their economic policies were incredibly unsuccessful, and they were amazingly poor. And so they've corrected for that with basically the same economic model. It's industrial, export-led, and now they need to move away from that. Now they need to rebalance to more of a consumer-based economy. And the jury is very much out in terms of how successful they'll be over the next few years, what sort of rates of growth they'll achieve. And then back to South Africa. South Africa also needs to rebalance, but in the opposite way, towards an economy which has placed non-viable reliance on the domestic consumer, who's now overly indebted, and the economy hasn't transitioned, hasn't rebalanced to one that's integrated in the world economy, that focuses on competitiveness, which has a model like China, where you can focus on exports and invest in people so they become globally competitive as part of companies which are globally competitive. That's never really been the emphasis in South Africa, really ever.
But some would argue that when you look at the structure of the South African economy at the moment, there is a need for an interventionist government, if you like, because you clearly still need to balance the destruction that was caused by apartheid at the same time, while of course adapting to the new economy. I guess maybe the challenge is in trying to do both.
Godfrey, I think you know you're pushing my buttons here. I really don't buy into that. The reality is that the government looks at what has worked in the past elsewhere, and the world is changing very, very rapidly. I mean, if we just look at the past few months, if you just go back to this time last year, October last year, if you look at what has happened with commodity prices, the world is very much transitioning. And the big picture, which we should keep in mind, is just look at, there's like 7 billion people, there'll soon be 9 billion by mid-century. But during that same time period, the next 35 years, the size of the global economy will go from about 80 trillion to something like 240 trillion. So that's a much larger increase, and it absolutely cannot be done because of climate change and all other kinds of binding constraints. It cannot be done with the same industrial model. So we're shifting very, very rapidly, and you can really see it in the capital markets, commodity markets. It's happening right now. And then if you look at the interventionist ideas from the senior people in the ANC, it's very appropriate for 25, 30 years ago, not all appropriate. There really are answers looking forward, and looking to the past isn't very helpful at all.
So, if you were to advise the ANC, Sean, what would you say to them? What do they need to concentrate on in order to be able to address the issues that they are trying to address, some of them noble, and at the same time be able to live up with the global economy? Or are they going to do you think, be consigned to the dustbin of history, and we're going to talk about a former ruling party? And if you are saying that, I want to know your time frames.
Okay, right. So like the Kodak example, because Kodak, you could see where if their leaders from 15, 20 years ago, whatever the right time is if they'd been forward thinking, they would have invented something like Instagram, maybe even Facebook. I mean, if you look at what's going on Facebook now, it's very similar to the marketing of Kodak 25, 30 years ago. It's all about memories and things like that. In terms of advising the ANC, I would say, first off, and I think there's a much greater awareness around this, that there certainly are the debates, although there are people who take a staunch sort of Leninist Marxist view, but that you have to work much more closely with big business, because big business, as well as smaller businesses certainly, are better able most of the time to drive the ship into the future. And the reality is that politically that is uncomfortable, and the reason it is because the government has gone so far down the path of redistribution, and what's happening now as a result of commodity prices, as a result of placing way too much emphasis on redistribution to create political support. You can just run the numbers, and there are serious problems. And the finance minister is making those points. So there's growing awareness that the current model will not continue to work. And R.W. Johnson has come out with an intriguing book, which I'm reading at the moment, and he says, in 2 years, the game is up for the ANC. I don't know how you get a time period that's quite that specific, but I can say unequivocally that there needs to be changes, fundamental changes, and they should happen faster than 2 years. I mean, they really should happen very, very quickly.
Okay, so things are changing very quickly indeed. Now, let's tackle one of the issues that the ANC has been speaking about, and I think other people have been talking about as well, but it's a delicate, sensitive issue. The accusation is that the ANC says it is working with a business sector that has got a different ideological slant that aligns with the opposition, and therefore feels compelled to create its own class, if you like, of business people that are like-minded and think in the same kind of way around fairness and redistribution. What did you say to that?
Obviously, there's something to that, but you could obsess around that and just make all the right decisions. There's no risk-free approach, and really, in terms of, everyone's in the same boat. However, the big corporate executives, at some point they retire, they cash in their stock options, and they've done fine. It's not really their problem. It is, in terms of righting the economy, the ruling party in government needs, like really all the ruling parties everywhere else, and you raised China, which does have a different model, but their model is changing. Really what has worked, the reason the East has been so successful is increasingly governments have looked to support business. And the ANC and the South African Communist Party, and clearly the unions, don't think like that. So that's where you have fundamental political binding constraints on the political economy that the country absolutely has to get over. And that's why I use the metaphor of the Kodak moment, where Kodak was on the right track. Transformation, political, social transformation is on the right track. But the Kodak people need to be more aware of how the world and the markets and the environment was changing around them, and they failed to do that. And the same thing is happening. And now there's all kinds of indicators. We don't need any new information to work out that the ANC has to fundamentally change their engagement with business and their overall thinking about intervention in the economy. They need to back away and have business make more of their key decisions.
Finally, Sean, do you think it's capable of change, the ANC?
People are full of surprises. to the upside and sometimes not. But they're capable. And obviously there's factions within the ANC. And certainly there's the age thing, and they're under a lot of pressure from younger people, and also at the provincial level. And that's how politics in a democratic system is supposed to work.
Absolutely. And it's certainly a question that we're going to be watching over the next few years, months, and see if indeed the ANC is able to make that transition and continue to be able to provide what South Africans want and continue to be the ruling party. That was Sean Hagedorn, an independent strategist, joining us from our studios in Cape Town.